much for the kind introduction, for the invitation to be here. I'm thrilled to be here and meet. I've met several of you and heard about your work. I think this science of intelligence concept is a terrific concept. I wish it would continue. I think it's really good, and the work that I've seen done is also amazing. So congratulations to all of those working on it. I really love the idea. I'd like to tell you a little bit about where I fit into the business of intelligence, and that has to do a lot with vision for me. It's really my only thing. The presentation will have several parts. I'll set up the problem for you. I'll talk about some human experimental data, and you'll see the reason as to why I'll be talking about human experimental data. The data, as you will see, is crazy, and we'll dig into it and only really touch the surface of that digging. This is one of the places where I think we will need some help in terms of digging, because there's so much of it. What did I do wrong? Okay. I'll then talk a little bit about the how a model of attention is refined using that data. That part will be, this is not as polished as everything else. It might be a little bit more speculative, but I'd really like to try it and hear your opinion of what you think of it. So that's what that is. I'm pretty sure I know what the model means, so that part will not be so speculative. So let me get started. As I wrote in the abstract, seeing and looking are two words that we sometimes use interchangeably. One is used to define the other. David Marr famously wrote about it. What we're interested in is everyday three-dimensional vision. How an agent, a human agent or a machine agent, I kind of use the two interchangeably in my head, deal with 3D vision in the real world. So seeing and looking are really the start for both. And if, your intuition tells you that I see and then I look, and then I see and then I look. So that's what that kind of looks like. There's seeing and there's looking. Seeing analyzes the scene. And the idea is to provide data from which one could predict potential new attentional foci for looking. And then looking moves to that focus and aligns your optical axis with that. So that's the basic ground for the work here. It's been known for a long time, since at least Posner's 1980 classic paper, that a covert shift of attention precedes an overt shift. Namely, I'm looking at the gentleman in front of me, and I decide, okay, I'm now bored. I'm going to look over at the chair, at the one next to me. And that's done inside my head without an eye movement, and then I move my eye. So I first have to decide where I want to look, and then I move. The mechanism for that, though, has been elusive. How exactly does that happen? Especially, how does it happen in 3 dimensions? So that's what we're really interested in. And 3-dimensional vision, as you all know, in a robotics context, involves quite a bit more than just that. For humans, it involves all of these different kinds of eye movements. There's been a lot of research done to try and quantify them, whether it be in vision science, in ophthalmology, for clinical purposes, and a wide variety of things. But what we have clearly is, well, I can move my head in X, Y, and Z, right? And I can roll, pitch, and yaw. And my eyes can move either in the same direction or they can move in opposite directions, as you see in all of this. I'm not going to go through all of that in detail. And I have a neck that allows me to do this. So I have a lot of degrees of freedom in this system that I can use. And this might kind of think, well, active vision does all of that. And sure enough, as Aravind had mentioned, we've done a lot of work in active perception over the years. There are 3 little movies in there that you can look at as I speak. Over in the top left is the first ever active object recognition system. We presented it at CVPR in 1992, David Wilkes' PhD thesis, where he was able to move a camera in the right way to distinguish a particular origami object from a jumble of origami objects. Directly below that is a robot head that we built in 1993. It includes cyclotorsion, a motion that is not common in most robot heads. And over on the right, which I clearly have to play again because it ended, is a collaboration we did with Honda Europe here in Germany, in Offenbach, where we took methods from, you see my cursor? Yeah. From Yiming Yi and Ksenia Shubina and visual search using an active robot, and ported them to Asimo. And then Asimo is searching, he's looking for that little object right there. And he searches his world in the same way as we had our search algorithms first defined in 1999, and eventually we'll find it. You see, I don't know if you can see, he moves his head up and down a little bit in order to view, and at the end, he points. And we had wanted, so this project came about because I gave a talk at a conference following someone from Honda who spoke, and they were showing Asimo grasping a bottle of Coke. And I asked them, would you like Asimo to be able to find the bottle of Coke and then grasp it? Wow, that'd be great. So set up a collaboration. They were terrific partners. The only problem was that Asimo can't actually grasp much. It's very, very limited. So that's why he's just pointing there. At any rate, there's a lot of work done there. As you might guess, there is a strong connection between where these robots look and attention, as I had mentioned. So we've done a lot of work in visual attention as well over the years. I've been developing this model that I've called selective tuning since 1987. Your first question should be, such a long time, how come you haven't got it right yet? Because it's hard. And so I'll just use that as my excuse. It's hard. The basic definition, so when we did this, we're always hoping to be able to have not only an impact on computational vision, but also on human vision, in order to try and understand how exactly is it that people do it. Maybe we can learn how a robot should do it. That's a common theme that underlies a lot of vision for a lot of years. The definition of attention that we used is that it's a set of mechanisms, and they tune and control the search processes inherent in perception and in cognition, and the major types being selection, suppression, and restriction. So there's a shameless advertisement for my 2011 book, where you could look and get all the detail on the selective tuning model. The model itself looks like this in caricature. It was first described this way in the AI journal in 1995. And you can probably guess that I could do a whole talk, 2 hours, just on that slide. I'm not going to. I'm going to point out a few basic things. First, there's a timeline, and that timeline is intended to match human perception. So there's, at the 150 millisecond mark and so forth. Second, it's a neural network, which is shown by the pyramid structure, and that there are top-down and bottom-up passes in succession. So it's a network that has multiple traversals through it. So if you look at the timeline and go here to 150 milliseconds, this is a feed-forward pass. It does what I've called convergence binding, namely anything, it's only feed-forward, so when you have convergence at a point, those features are bound into some other unit. And it's been shown in humans that it takes 150 milliseconds of human processing to be able to categorize something, to answer simple questions. So that first feed-forward pass is intended to mimic that. The rest then is a top-down pass, because think about it. If the first feed-forward pass takes 150 milliseconds and it takes you longer to do a task, what's happening? Well, you're going to have to use that same hierarchy. You use it in the other direction. So that's the basic idea. And if that's the case, then you see there are multiple different circuits that can go through this network and thus have many different functionalities. So it depends on the amount of time and the number of times you go through the network in a top-down and bottom-up fashion, and how you prime the network each time for a specific task. In order to do all of that, you need an executive controller. So that's really a quest for the future, is what exactly would that controller look like? And you can see more in those couple of papers. So we've done all of that stuff. It's a very good model of biological visual attention. Why do I say that? You should all think to yourselves, isn't attention solved? Wasn't there this famous paper, Attention is All You Need, that everybody now uses, and isn't it done? The answer is no, it's not done. Here's a paper that we have with my PhD student, Priya Mehrani, that demonstrates that self-attention, all it does is grouping, perceptual grouping. Now, I'm not trying in any way to minimize the impact of the paper. It's a great paper. The name is lousy. The title is lousy. The paper itself is fine. And the fact that it added grouping is something that CNNs did not have. Thus, it immediately surpassed what CNNs could do because it added grouping. And that's certainly something that the brain can do. The Gestalt psychologists from the early 1900s had described all of that for us. So what we've shown here with Priya is that that's the function that transformers do. It's not attention, though. What selective tuning does is a lot more. These are, this is a lot of text, I know, but what I tried to show you is that the model itself, the computational side of the model, made a number of predictions of new knowledge that people did not know. And that experimentally, these have now been verified. So you see there's a color coding. The green is that there is single cell evidence, single cell neural recordings. Blue, it's behavioral psychology evidence. Red, brain imaging evidence. And the dark blue is where the first description of the prediction came. So for each of those predictions, there is a lot of evidence from many different modalities of experimentation that have verified these predictions. If you look through them, you might ask questions, like for all of them, but like, for example, surround suppression takes time to appear, 150 to 500 milliseconds. What do you mean, time to appear? So this is the definitive view for what neural recordings under different circumstances, including attention, would look like. Horizontally, we have time, 350 milliseconds, firing rate and spikes. In the little black rectangles are what the stimuli look like. So you can have a stimulus that is only this blue one, which this particular neuron from which Reynolds and Calazzi and Desimone recorded doesn't like that stimulus. So its response is low, the blue line. On the other hand, it likes the red one, the vertical red bar. It likes that one. The response is high. So the big question then is, what happens if you put both in the same receptive field? How does it respond? Well, it responds at this intermediate level in the purple, unless you tell the animal to attend to the red. And when you tell the animal to attend to the red, it's as if the blue isn't there at all. So this is, first of all, evidence that there is no max or anything like that kind of a function in receptive fields. And it depends on where you're attending. So if you now have, so in order for attention to show up, you see how at the 100 millisecond mark, 150 millisecond mark, which all feed-forward networks adhere to, they only represent that, you can't tell the difference between those top three responses. You have to wait to see the effect of attention in order to tell the difference between those responses. So that's what I wanted to show you there, is that the time part is really important. The other one that we found really fascinating is that children don't have this suppressive surround. What do I mean by suppressive surround? I should say that. I'm looking at this gentleman here, and I'm checking out his nose. Forgive me for using it as an example. Checking out his nose. If I'm attending to the nose, what the brain does is suppress the region around. It's a signal to noise thing. You want all the non-nose stuff to not interfere with the nose stuff, right? So that's what it does. That's what the surround suppression, that's what the model predicted that everyone has found since. But that's a capability that children don't have. I don't know if any of you have children. I don't know if any of them are young and you wonder, is it behavioral problems or anything? Sometimes it's because you do not have the ability to suppress the surround, and the inability to attend overwhelms. So we did an experiment at our science center. We got 600 children to try this, and found that until 8 years old, you do not have this attentive ability at all. It only starts growing gradually, and it only reaches an adult level by 17 years old. So this is just a couple of examples of the kinds of predictions the selective tuning model has made, which are very novel and are strictly new knowledge. So the trick now is, how am I going to integrate attention and active vision? Be able to get that 3D stuff happening and so forth. The first time we tried it was when Sven Dickinson was a postdoc in the lab, and Henrik Christensen, who may be a name in robotics that you know of, was also a collaborator. And we did a nice job, but really selective tuning had not taken off by that time. And we really want to figure out, if I believe in selective tuning as the model of attention in the brain, then how does it interact with everything else in my brain in order to make stuff happen, make me able to do things? So we developed a cognitive architecture called STAR, which includes all of the other components that we want. I'm not going to tell you a lot of detail on this because I'd be here for 3 days. But the way to look at it is not as if we're building a particular program to do a task or anything like that, but rather I'm looking at it as a computational probe. We're looking at this architecture STAR as a computational probe into what the roles of attention and active perception are for an embodied agent. It's very easy if you have a particular task to answer that question. But if you need an agent that can do all tasks, it's a very difficult question because it doesn't generalize. We did our homework before start embarking on this, and another shameless advertisement. This book is just coming out now. It's with my PhD student, Yulia Kotsaruba, and it's kind of an encyclopedia of all cognitive architectures that have ever appeared over the last 40 years. And I think Yulia did an amazing job, so I'm really proud of her for that. So that should be available for order on Oxford now. Our problem is, though, that selective tuning isn't three-dimensional. It doesn't know how to solve problems. Nothing that I showed you so far would tell you how to use it. So what intelligence is needed then for a rational agent that functions purposefully in a real three-dimensional world? What is needed? Well, lots of things are needed. I'm interested in the vision part. So it should be able to solve three-dimensional visual problems. What are those? What are such things? I'm sure you all have your favorite set of them. But there's a lot of underlying work that we could use. All of these kinds of puzzles you've seen before. They're on IQ tests of a variety kind. They're children's toys and so forth. There's a lot of this stuff. Where's Waldo there, in case you can't see the detail. The problem is that almost all of these, I think all of these, are two-dimensional. Human three-dimensional performance data almost does not exist on this. So this is really where the problem lies, is where is the human data from which we can get knowledge and inspiration? Which is why we decided, well, we're just going to have to do it ourselves. And I was really happy to see, oh man, I forgot your names, I'm sorry. Ula and doing these experiments the other day, because they're very related. So I had a PhD student, nice German boy from named Marcus Solbach, who took on this task. He designed a facility that's called Passau for doing these psychophysical tasks. You see a subject in the middle there. He stands between these two posts. You'll see this again in a second. He wears these glasses here, which are eye tracking glasses that are outfitted with OptiTrack markers. And there are cameras and lighting sources in the room that you see there. So in this setup, we've run 2 experiments so far. One is published, one is almost there. It's on bioRxiv, you can find it. One is, can you find this object, visual search? And the other is, are these 2 objects the same or different? Now you can easily imagine that these are very fundamental to all visual problem solving. You do these things all the time, every day. So understanding these is very important. We'll go through them one at a time. Can you find this object as like, where's Waldo? Visual search. we used these little dollhouse toys as our objects. And that's the setup. There are tables, there are objects on them. These objects in different poses, different orientations. The cages are there so that we can have them above a table. Some of the sides of the cages are blacked out, so there is no easy visibility. And this subject goes around, as you see, untethered, perfectly naturally. It's the headset is very light, and searches for the object. You might be wondering why this particular subject is taking a long time. That's because this is a target absent trial. Target's not there. So, of course, we do those. Visual search does those as well. So you see that he just goes around and he keeps all this natural motion. I'll let that keep going and move on to the next one. The second one was motivated by the Shepard and Metzler experiments of same different for mental rotation. Except we did it in 3D, so Marcus decided, the first experiment, by the way, is Tiffany Wu, a current PhD student. The same or different experiment is Marcus Solbach again. So he constructed these objects. These are all 3D printed objects. If you want them, he can give you the code, it's there. And ask the question of subjects, are these the same or different? It's kind of hard from a single view, so what if I rotate them? It might get a little bit easier, but not easy enough. So what we do is we put these on posts in this environment and allow a subject to make their own mind up. So they can move around and look at the objects. They're not allowed to touch them. These objects are placed at different 3D poses. They have a common coordinate system, so they're at different 3D poses. And the subject just moves around until they decide on the question. It's a forced alternative two-choice problem, so they have to decide, same or different. So you see him going around. And I'm not going to let this run because I'll run out of time. And the end result is that those are the paths that are taken. So the frustra are showing you the optical axis of the current seeing action. So this is where you have a fixation. So you're fixated, and that shows you where. For the same different task, if you're fixated on object 1, it's blue frustrum. If you're fixated on object 2, it's the red one, the magenta. And if it's gray, it's the environment, because this was a little bit of a surprise to us. We were wondering, where do you look? We didn't realize that you also have to look at the floor to tell you where to walk. So, right? So you have to record that also. It's something that no visual search experiment has ever done because they're all on a screen. You don't need this. So you need to include, how do I deal with those fixations? And the same thing is true in the visual search task, where you see a lot more fixations because they had to verify that the object is not present. It's easy if it's present. It's kind of a linear search through everything. But to verify that it's not present, you go through a lot more views. And again, there are a lot more environmental views in all of that. So these are, the head position is the white lines. These are things that we could not have predicted before we did the experiment. And I think give a wealth of information with respect to exactly what it is that people may be doing in all this. In the past, people have looked, we also record first-person video. In the past, people have looked at first-person video as a proxy for where you're looking. So here's the first-person video. You're looking at the camera, optical axis is the center, and that's what you see. And it might tell you, oh, that's where I'm looking. And certainly lots of developmental experiments with children, mount cameras on children and get a first-person view. And this is where they're looking. Unfortunately, if we now plot fixation points from the eye tracker on this, and the red is the fixation, you're actually fixating all over the place. You're not fixating at the center of the cross. So first-person video with head-based coordinates doesn't give you the information you want. The fixations are actually all over the place. So it's very complex. There's a summary of the data, the first of the summaries, with lots more examples. You see that in visual search, we ran 72 subjects in same different 47 subjects. We got hundreds of trials out of each case. We got thousands of fixations and head movements and meters of head movement and so forth. So there's a huge amount of data. You can read about Marcus's experiment in scientific reports. Tiffany's, it is close. It is close to getting it in, so just keep your eye open for it. But this tells you that there's a wealth of data, and trying to make sense of all of it is far from easy, far from straightforward. We tried all kinds of data mining methods and statistics, and you don't really get as much as you think you should get. Here's a little summary of some of the observations and analyses that we have for the two. When we're doing these experiments, by the way, subjects do not have practice trials. And we have a questionnaire at the end that asks them basically, what do you think you were doing? What were you searching for? Those sorts of things. The surprise was that the accuracy is high from the first trial. On average, they're both over 90% accuracy across all of the trials. Across the trials, you would expect some improvement, but there was no improvement in accuracy across the trials. Where there was improvement was in efficiency. It was almost like you knew how to do this from the get-go, and you did it. You did it correctly. And then as you did more of them, you did it better in terms of how many head movements and fixations you were using. But you were still just as accurate. So that's a very different sort of learning than has been pursued by most of the community. So here, clearly you've learned how to do this at some point. And then when presented with a novel situation, you take what you learned, dynamically create a solution, which you then optimize as you go. Yep.
Would you expect, because the accuracy is already quite high, right? If you would make the task more difficult, like for example, only 50%, that then you would get an increase in accuracy.
I think that the accuracy is so high that you kind of get to a ceiling effect.
Exactly, that's
that you're not going to get much better at accuracy. It would take you longer to do this. I have one example which in, I guess, the next slide, which might address some of this, but that's a very good question in general. I really don't have an answer as to how you could get better accuracy from the beginning. Yes?
Did the environmental fixation go down with more trials? Because, I mean, at one point, you know the surroundings, it's an even floor, how to move around. Is that?
I think that we have not computed that, but my intuition tells me that should be true. You're correct. Because, after there are two posts. Once you figure out the layout of the posts, how many more times do you need to figure it out? This is exactly right. Anything else? Okay. But of course you learned, as I just said, how to solve these problems as you grow up. And as you experience the world. So, is it really that simple? Let's think about this. Could you do this visual search, for example, yesterday? Yes, you could. Could you do it last year? Yes. How about when you were 10 years old? How about when you were 5 years old? Could you still do it? I don't know. You could.
For sure.
When did you start being able to do it? Is really the question you want to find out. So, we got lucky. We have a 3.5-year-old little girl who has never been at the university, has never seen this setup, does not know any of the people, and we asked her to find one of the objects. She was completely not fazed. It's this object there that she's looking for. She even, tilts her head to make sure that it's what it was supposed to be, and then stops. And then she forgot the instructions. So she waited now for her mother to tell her what to do. But she had no difficulty at 3.5 to do this. So when did you get enough experience? It's not an experience thing. The Tower of Hanoi has been one of the most studied of the AI problems from the beginning. And as a toy, it's appropriate for a 3-year-old. When you buy the toy, I know because I bought this toy. And some 2.5-year-olds can stack these blocks very well. General problem solver didn't use learning and did it right away, back in the 50s. Did it solve it because of experience? Not clear how that exactly works. So I think that's an open question. And for our star architecture, we have an idea for how to begin to approach this, but that'll be for the next talk, not this one. Data. So we have a lot of data. And digging into it is really a question. As I said, the generic kinds of things really don't work. It took kind of an accidental observation to give us a clue on what to do. So seeing and looking, if you remember this from earlier, how many fixations do we have? Well, we have a lot of fixations. And there are these plots of exactly what the durations are of seeing and looking for both the visual search, VS, and same different experiment, SD. Now I've highlighted this red portion underneath both of them for a particular reason, because the little vertical arrow is at 150 milliseconds in terms of duration. The arrow that goes outwards tells you all of those fixations are beyond the first feed-forward pass. What's happening there if it's beyond the feed-forward pass? Something else must be going on. If I'm still looking and if I'm still seeing for those, am I processing in the feedback direction as I showed you? Am I doing higher orders of processing? What combination? I don't know. We have to figure that out. So we have a lot there to do. We also plotted how many times you look at the same object in sequence for the same different problem, and then look to the next object. And it turns out that you're looking at the same object for all kinds of fixations. And again, what exactly is it that you're doing? You can guess that, well, you're building a model. Well, easier said than done. What does that mean, building a model? Where do I put it? In my pocket? No. I mean, for working memory. How does the working memory work then for all of this? It's all up in the air. This is what fixating on the same object looks like. This is like a caricature from an actual one of seven fixations. The red circle gives you the error that the eye tracker has with respect to its fixation. So in this case, I'm looking at several different locations. What does this look like in real life? Well, one of them we've called pinned fixation locomotion, and it looks like that. You can easily imagine yourself doing that. You look at an object and you continually look at it as you move around. What could you be doing? Structure for motion. Structure for motion needs 4 points and 3 views, and 3 different views, and it's done. The classic paper is Koenderink and Van Doorn. Tons of work has been done on structure for motion. Maybe you're computing that. And when we saw the first instance, we then wondered how many other instances in the data set there are. There's 900 of these. So there's a lot of them. Maybe there are other things like this, where you can attach a simple computation to a small segment of fixations in order, and that makes sense by itself. So we started looking for those. One of my favorites is with respect to binocular fusion. So those of you who have studied stereo vision, this will be a review. For those of you who have not, this might be new and not so easy to get all together, but we could talk about it. So when you're stereo vision, I'm fixating at a point, usually like at the horizon right ahead of me, right? That's what that figure says. And the area of fusion, namely which points will, depending on my fixation, will fuse on the back of the retina in the same location so that I can say that that's zero disparity. So it's on a circle, and there's also a vertical horopter as well. So it's a horizontal and a vertical horopter. Empirically, those are not lines, but really have some volume. So that's the volume in which when I'm looking directly ahead at the horizon, that's the volume where I have fusion, binocular fusion, and thus good stereo vision. If I happen to look upwards, not by moving my head, just moving my eyes, no movement of my head, just my eyes, like that, then that region changes into this third order polynomial. It becomes a complex area and empirically very, very narrow. So in other words, if I'm looking straight ahead at the horizon, I have very good stereo vision right in that area. But if I don't move my head and I look up there, I start to have very poor stereo vision in a very small area. So if I do that, wouldn't it be the right thing to do is to try and see that point from a different viewpoint to get better stereo? Let's take a look. So these are eye movements without head movements. So you see fixation 13, 14, they followed one another, 23, 24, they follow one another. The first one is on the horopter. The horopter is shown by these yellow bars, vertical and horizontal. And then the second fixation, the one upwards, is off the horopter in both cases. So the prediction would be that if you have those two fixations, the next fixation should be to bring that point into the horopters, right? Because that will give you fusion. And sure enough, there's no head movement between those first two fixations, and then with head movement, that fixation comes back. So that's a triplet of fixations that seem to have the purpose, I emphasize seem, because this now needs to be tested in the brain, and we haven't done that, seem to have the purpose of improving your stereo ability, stereo vision, by getting an appropriate new viewpoint by moving your head. We found thousands of these. It wasn't just a one-off thing. We found thousands of these. I'll show you one more example. We actually were at about a dozen of these kinds of small micro-strategies. Let me show them. Here's another one. Successive fixations on the same region. So I have, these two are side by side, side by side. I do a head movement and I'm looking at exactly the same spot. So the fixation is exactly the same spot. And we were very puzzled as to what was going on until we remembered some of our old work on view degeneracy. So Sven Dickinson, David Wilkes, and I had this paper on degeneracy. Degeneracy is basically where you have two lines or 2 points that coincide in an image and you can't tell them apart, whether by machine or human. They're just overlapping, so you can't tell them apart. What we showed in that paper is that the probability of this happening is actually pretty high, higher than you might imagine, and that you cannot prove that there's a view degeneracy with a single view. You cannot prove it from a single view that there exists a viewpoint degeneracy. So how do you do that? That means you must suspect it in order to move around and break the degeneracy, right? You must suspect it. Now, weak or uncertain aspects of figure ground separation offer that source. And you know what figure ground separation is because you know Rubin's vase and other examples of this sort, where you have to make a decision for the outline as to whether it belongs on the vase or on a face. So that's border ownership, because this is degenerate in that sense. So let's do it. We did an experiment. With my postdoc, no, she was graduate, she was a PhD student, so Priya Makrani, that's her hand. This was done during COVID, that's in her apartment. So that's the explanation for this. She held the object, the same object that I just showed you at approximately the same orientation, and ran her algorithm for border ownership, which you can read about in Vision Research, And those are the results. Those red arrows show you the strength of border ownership for the line that is here, namely the point on the border belongs to the object on the inside, so pointing to the inside of the object. But there's a gap at that particular region, and that's the degenerate part. Interestingly, the gap gets larger as you move the object further away. So distance plays a role here also with the degeneracy. Interestingly, the viewpoint change that we saw that I just showed you, the real one, when we implemented that by hand, approximately, the degeneracy goes away. So now it's clear across the entire boundary. So I think that that's amazing. That was really by accident that we found it. We've found hundreds of these as well. So a poor border ownership signal could trigger a change of viewing angle or viewing distance. So that's where the suspicion comes from. You have to have the right signal that will tell you about this suspicion. So how do you determine the viewpoint from this then? Well, it's a difficult question. This is just an algorithm that we think might work, hasn't been implemented yet. So you need to detect gaps in border ownership at the start. You need to access a surface normal map. I'll say something more about that. You know what the current vector of the optical axis is into the image, that point. And then what you need to do is try to minimize that distance, try to align one to the other. In other words, I want to bring myself to look closer into that object, okay? And that's exactly what the other view is. I'm now looking closer. You can mentally rotate the object, I hope, to do that, so that the problem is now resolved with that head motion, okay? The weakness is resolved. This means, what does this mean? Well, this means that I have to be computing all kinds of stuff that normally you don't hear about in computer vision. I have to be computing a border ownership signal. I have to be computing a surface normal. David Marr talked about the 2.5D sketch, but there aren't any implementations of it out there, and almost nobody does stereo in this way anyway to be able to compute it. So these are all kinds of quantities that we find are needed here that are difficult. So we're busy trying to build this network. This is work that, again, Priya Mehrani has done, that is putting together a network of what are the neural selectivities of feature detectors that are of interest. So I don't know how well you can read it, but in the, we have orientation, which is the common thing that everyone has. We have side of figure for border ownership. We've got curvature detection and 2D detection. We have color border ownership in here as well. And I'll point out one really interesting thing. That is, this is area MT, which those of you who know is dorsal and not in the ventral stream. And this arrow points back. What do you mean by this? So, the dorsal stream, which is the common one that you see in most computer vision and the one most studied in biological vision as well, has a particular speed, parvocellular speed. The ventral, the dorsal has faster speed, magnocellular. It has such a speed, this is very well written by Jean Boulier in a 2001 paper. It has enough speed so that it can have a signal go to MT and then back down to V1 in time to meet the incoming signal from V1. The MT signal has a larger spatial scale than the V1. So that gives you a spatial constraint on the V1 computation. It's like doing scale space by having this interesting structure. So that's what we've used here in order to make all of this work. So you can read all about it like this, but I think that and I don't think this is like the last word at all on how to do this. But what it does tell me is that the strictly learned kind of pipelines that you see these days just won't give you the visual attributes that you need in order to compute these quantities, because you don't have control over them. You need to be able to have control over these. The other part that I mentioned, the surface normal, well, we need to compute binocular disparities to get this 2.5D sketch. So this is work that Mingxi Qi has done, as well as Perea and Joachim Filko. And I'll show you, we have convergent stereo images. So here's one image of a convergent pair. The fixation point is the cross, little red dot. And that's the other of the convergent pair. So you can see those, right? And there's the pair, left and right pair. Now from those, what Mingxi has done is has devised an algorithm to compute both horizontal and vertical disparities. You've seen that horizontal disparities computed in every stereo algorithm. Almost none do the vertical disparities. But with vertical disparities, we have a gradient in disparity space from which you can then compute the surface normal. That's the idea. You might ask, where do you get these convergent images from? We have a new robot stereo head that does provide for convergent view. This is work that's led by Mustafa Kamali Tabrizi and involves many other people. And what we wanted to do is design a head that had the same kind of relationships that the human head motion has. Remember that early slide I showed you? So it has all of those different degrees of motion, roughly the same amounts of motion, not the same speeds. Accuracy is good, maybe a little bit, human accuracy is a little bit better. But this is the head doing its thing. So as you see, it can have all of these motions. The eyes will rotate, you'll see them rotating, and we're busy trying to best use it. We figured out how to get accurate saccades out of it, and we continue to do all this. But this can get us our convergent binocular images, and we have the algorithms for doing vertical disparity as well. Summary number 2, what I've shown you is a variety of non-standard visual attributes, things that you're not going to get by learning from a set of images at all, because you need far more detail in terms of how the processing happens. In this digging for data, I've shown you 3 examples, but then we found many more, so all of these are other attributes that we need to compute in order to go. And I think we've only scratched the surface because there's so much data. I think there's a lot more to be looked at in terms of trying to understand what these little short snippets of data do actually. So how does all of this fit into this selective tuning model that I mentioned to you? I think that's really what the next question is. And that's the refining part. Here's where things will get a little bit not as polished as this so far. If you felt this was not polished yet, you're really not going to like this. But if you felt it was okay, then this is just a little less polished. Remember the model? So eye movements. The model initially did not have eye movements written up in it. So we have done some work on eye movements that I'll show you, independent of this other data. The usual way that you see eye movements is that there's a saliency map, and then I look for a peak in that heat map, and that's where I look. And this is the classic Roman 1985 map, a saliency map idea that has been pervasive almost everywhere. Even when CNNs came along and started using it, they included it almost directly as a weighting on other features and used it that way. We didn't think that that was quite enough, so we had a slightly different view of this, namely computing a priority map instead of a saliency map that had a few more inputs to it. The one input is basically some top-down information that would encode what have I seen and what should I see. Now, there's no reason to repeat what I'm looking at, and I should try and bias for things that I really want to see for my task. Also, we included a peripheral attention map. Now this gets complicated. I won't say much about it unless you ask me. But this is feature-based, early features that are only in the periphery. And yes, that representation has a hole in the middle of it. And yes, you can say, what? There's a representation with a hole in it. Where in the brain is there a hole? Turns out that there is an area, it was called PO, it's now called V6, where the representation is everything but the central 10 degrees of the retina. Everything outside the central 10 degrees. That's what we want. That's exactly the area we want. That's what is represented there, these peripheral features. And then a conspicuity map that combines the peripheral features with the central attention features. The central attention one tells us what we're really looking for. What are we looking at? What's the best candidate for what we're looking at? Combine those together into a priority map, bias it by what I have seen and what I should see, and then you get a priority map from which you can make selections as to where to look. And that connects up to the diagram you saw earlier through that central piece there. So you have the peripheral comes from early vision, the central comes at the end of the 150 milliseconds portion, and this has all been written up and tested. The model itself in the Journal of Eye Movement Research at CVPR in 2018, Calden Bloka, a PhD student of mine, showed an implementation of this and compared it to all of the other saliency models as well as human predictions. So there's a data set of sequences of predictions, five fixations of humans. So based on comparison to 5 fixations of humans, ours, the red one, and the human, the blue one, are almost overlapping. All the other leading algorithms are far off. So I think we kind of got this one in terms of being able to model that one properly. So for the rest of this, though, I'm going to redraw this a little bit. Do I have any time left, or?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, so it's up to you. So we have about half an hour left.
Oh, great. Okay.
So
okay, so I'm redrawing this a little bit in order to make this a little bit simpler, because these diagrams will start to get a little bit complex. So we have the green shows you a queuing or a priming, a top-down effect on the network. The blue shows you feed forward based on stimuli. The first one of these shows you the top-down localization with the suppressive surround. In other words, this is a top-down search, which will select what's of interest, suppress things in the neighborhood that are interfering. This is just strictly signal-to-noise issues, strictly signal-to-noise. And the final one shows that, well, once I've cleaned up the signal-to-noise, I can reanalyze in a clean signal. Okay? So these are the images I'll use. So the first one is top-down queuing. At the top here, I show for all of these slides what are the attentional mechanisms at play, just to make sure that we know that we have a set of mechanisms operating all the time, and they're always different. So there needs to be an executive that does this. The 2 little eyes there are kind of cute. They actually play a role only on the last slide. So for the rest, it's just for cuteness. We need to have a little bit on top of all of this that allows us to control it. There's a task executive, basically, that will tell us what it is that I should see, and then a controller that will implement all of that. We've already built this. This already works. So there's, in the brain, it's been described long ago, and at one of the CVPR workshops in 2018, my postdoc Amir Rosenfeld and PhD student Madi Bifarva had implemented this as a top-down priming on CNN and showed that it gives you the results you want. So by priming for bottle, it gave you the bottles in the scenes, dining table, person, and so forth for the top scene. So all of that works. And the second one is the feed-forward pass. So here, I'll show you, let's see. Do you see the square? you want to see it again? So this is motion-defined form. There's no outline to the object. If you see an outline, it's just artifact from the graphics. There's no outline. There's been lots of experimental work on this. So in this particular work, you can, for this particular scene, you could have a top-down pass, a bottom-up pass with that input, and select at the top what the winner of that competition is, this feed-forward part, and ask the question, is this what I should be seeing? Because I'm told, what should I see? Okay, I've seen this. Is that the right thing? That's the question. And that's what the feed-forward pass looks like in this network. It's a giant network. It appears in that 2005 paper in CVIU on motion. Can't describe it. It has 700 different kinds of features in it, so I'm not going to describe it. You'll see more of it, though, in a second. So the localization part now basically starts to get complicated, because once you select that stimulus, is this what I should be seeing? You ask the question. If the answer comes back from the task executive, yes, great, you're done. If it says no, maybe I need more information, well, then you have to localize it in order to get that more information. And then you can repeat the process with the background suppression in place. Or you can move your eyes, so that becomes a focus of attention for something else. So we'll go through these one at a time. So there's the top-down localization that you see coming in that direction, as I showed you the diagram earlier. We've shown this at ECCV in 1992 for the first time. So that's been implemented for a long time, and yeah, I think it's funny too. So this is work from that Sean Culhane had done back in the days when I was still at the University of Toronto, and you can look at that. The other references that you see below are the key references to human vision that demonstrate the suppressive surround. So the one by Florian Kutsu, who was a postdoc of mine, we did at York. The ones below, the three below, are with collaborators at Magdeburg, which I will be giving this talk on Monday for. So they have been doing MEG experiments on this model for a number of years and have verified that this suppressive surround is something that actually exists in the brain. So here's what this top-down localization would look like. I'll just remind you of the stimulus, and then that's the input that results from the stimulus, and that's the top-down search that results from this. Now, when this hierarchy flips over, what you'll see is that all of those pieces, all those different features have been bound together into a rectangle. It doesn't know that it's a rectangle, but the only things left in this zone that I'm attending to is the rectangle. So if I now suppress the region around what I'm attending and let edge detectors run, they'll find the edges of the rectangle, which is what you want. That's what our perception is. So that's how all of that works. And again, that's shown in that 2005 paper. So in this case, then I could repeat what I just said, and if I wanted to do that, I'd have to add this other structure to the network. And the other option is that focus of attention becomes where I look next. So how exactly will that happen? The first choice is that it becomes a potential target for localization, as I said, and we need that structure. This structure is really what I had shown you earlier: peripheral map, conspicuity map, priority map. What should I see? What have I seen? It's just all that drawn a little bit differently. We've implemented, so all the stuff with the green check mark has been implemented and tested. I'll compress all of that into just one square that I'll call priority. It's there. And in this case, if the resolution is sufficient, I execute a covert shift. So if my focus of attention is nearby and it's good enough, I just don't even have to move my eyes or anything. I just attend it. And in that case, all of those variables don't need to change. So what I've done here is that all of the degrees of freedom of the head that I showed you on the very early slide now have a variable associated with them. And in this case, these do not change for covert. It's covert shift, no head movement, no eye movement. If, on the other hand, I want the viewpoint change, and now the eyes play. If you want a viewpoint shift, I can still move my eyes using the same thing, but now many of those variables do change because my eyes change. Not my head, just my eyes. So those variables change. And the final choice is that it becomes a viewpoint change, and in this case, a lot of the variables change. So this is basically the big picture of how eye movements, which include viewpoint change, which we hadn't had before, can be included into the selective tuning model. Putting the whole thing together and testing it, we're just doing now. We have not done it because our head just became operational, the disparities just became operational, all of that is very new stuff. So we're working on putting all of this together and testing it, and then I can tell you if it actually works or not. So what does all of this mean? Is the last phase of the talk, and then we can have questions. Well, first of all, what I've shown you is that there are a number of attentional mechanisms that play a role in visual problem solving. It's not just one. There's not just one kind of convex weighting of features or anything simple like that. It's a very complex kind of a structure which needs an executive in order to orchestrate what applies when and how. This is a critical piece. Successive fixations are not independent. They are causally connected. And that's the temporal connection is easy because you know one's after the other. The spatial connection is easy because you know where these are, so they're spatially connected. But they're within an algorithm that has a specific context. They're actually doing something. That's the causal connection, is that there's an actual function to those particular pairs, those particular groupings of fixations. And the number of these groupings that we've found should be pretty large, because as I said, we've found 10 to 12 of these already, and we're still busy looking. Executive control is important. I've mentioned this already in order to make these behaviors happen. And we need to have computations that are specific to support these. They cannot be simply the kind of learned representations that we see currently. Certainly not distributed, because these are all very targeted to location and type. It's not that you should always require to look at a grouping of feature outputs in order to extract meaning. Finally, this is all very consistent so far with how humans seem to behave and seem to see. So what I presented to you is I set up the problem. I told you about STAR as a computational probe into all of this. And as a probe, I think that we've done a reasonable job by looking at exactly what has to be happening in order for all of this to work in problem solving in 3D. I've shown you some experimental data, 2 experiments. We've tons of data. There's a third experiment that's ongoing that involves visual assembly. So I think that with those 3, we should have a very, very good foundation for looking at more generic kinds of visual problem solving. I've shown you how we've dug into the data to try and understand what that connection is, and that connection is causal. It's an algorithm that ties all these together. It's not random. And I've proposed how we're going to integrate them into the selective tuning model, and I've shown you our new robotic convergent head as well. The number of attentional mechanisms is significant. The number of microstrategies significant. You need control, and it's all distributed in terms of, it's not distributed in terms of representations. What did I learn from all of this? Not just what I concluded. Well, I learned that causality distinguishes seeing from looking. There's a causal context that's set up by seeing that then leads to looking. And attention plays the bridging role because you need to choose in a complex manner where to look next. The choices of fixations are the external, so all I can see is, I can see where you look. I can't see what you're thinking. So the external manifestation of these algorithms are what I'm seeing. And that's what the fixations are. So there's an algorithm running there that says, oh, I need this data. Oh, I need that data. Oh, I need this data. And that's what it's doing. So that's where that's why it's all tied together in this way. Any agent that does not have awareness of that context also has no ability to monitor itself and know if something has gone wrong, what the reason was. So it can't self-correct. Without understanding the causal context behind your eye movements, you cannot correct for an error. Any kind of a training set that separates these fixations, you can imagine taking all this data that we have, putting it into your favorite learning algorithm, which will then reorder them and augment them and do all sorts of stuff. Well, that destroys the context. That destroys the causality. So that's counterproductive. It can't be done that way. The only way it could be done by learning in the traditional sense is to get enough data for it. Although we've put in a lot of effort to get tens of thousands of samples, you would need many millions, if not more, of this. And it's not possible to easily do that in any way. So you cannot do this artificially by taking the existing data, manipulating it to make a bigger data set, because you destroy the context. All of these experiments also point to a very different way of deciding whether something is human equivalent. So I've shown you what people actually do. I've shown you the kind of statistics people actually have in all of this. So if you're going to give me a system and then say, this is human-like, oh, here's the data. Compare to this. Don't just compare to accuracy on a given data set, which is what is happening. And I think that is just driving the field into the wrong directions. I have all kinds of people to thank for this. All of my students, lab, previous collaborators, I'm sure some people not here, all kinds of granting agencies. So I appreciate it, and I really thank you for attending and listening to this overly long talk.